Hi, and welcome back to this week's Parsha Shir on Sefer Netivot. Shalom. We're studying Parsha Shmot this week. In the midst of the experience of the Sneh Boer, the burning bush, Moshe Rabbeinu's encounter with God in that moment, Moshe Rabbeinu levels a very important concern at God. In addition to the fact that he thinks he's not worthy of this mission, Hashem has to convince him that he is. In addition to the fact that he's concerned that Paro won't listen to him and won't free the Jewish people, he says that perhaps it might occur that the Jewish people themselves wouldn't believe in him or in God or in the fact that they were about to be redeemed. And so he says, Vayomer, he says to God, Ve'en lo ya'aminu li. Why are you sending me to do this, to tell them this? Even the Jewish people may not believe me. They may not believe me, and velo yishmeu bekoli, and they may not listen to me. They may not go along with our plan of trying to deliver them from Egypt. Ki yomru lo nirai lecha Hashem. They're going to say, oh, God never appeared to you, Moshe Rabbeinu. They're not going to have the faith in him that is necessary for him to truly lead them to the Geula, to the redemption. And so, of course, Hashem responds and says, okay, you're worried they're not going to believe you. I'm going to give you 3 miraculous signs that you're going to perform for them in Egypt. And after seeing these signs, they're going to believe you. The first is that he turns his staff, his mateh, into a snake and then turns it back. Then he turns his hand into being filled with saras, covered in saras, and then turns it back. And then that he takes the waters of the Nile and turns them into blood. And after these 3 signs, Jewish people should be able to believe him and trust him, that he truly did have an encounter and a revelation from Hashem earlier on, and that he truly was an emissary of Hashem trying to bring about the redemption. Netivot Shalom asks many questions on this small passage over here. I'd like to highlight 4 of his questions, which I think are particularly pertinent. He says, Yesh ledaktik b'Parshat Ha'osos. We have to really analyze and look carefully at the passage of these signs which are given to Moshe. Number 1, Madua chashad Moshe b'nei Yisrael shelo ya'aminu lo v'lo yishmeu b'kolo. What reason did Moshe have to think that the Jewish people wouldn't believe him, or wouldn't believe in God, or wouldn't believe that the Geula, the redemption, was at hand? After all, they had a Masorah, they had a tradition, they had an oral tradition passed along generation to generation of Pakod Yifkod Hashem Elokim Eschem, that God would indeed come and save them one day. They were waiting for that, and they were calling out to God to be able to save them, as the Torah itself tells us. So if they believed in a God, they believed that God was going to save them, believed that the Geula was supposed to come at some point in Jewish history, so what reason did Moshe think that they wouldn't believe him at this particular time, and that he needed to convince them of something? Second question, Kain tzarich bir ma adifus ha'osos zeh el zeh. Why does Moshe Rabbeinu need 3 miraculous signs in order to convince the Jewish people? Why wouldn't 1 be enough? Hashem says to him, okay, here's the first sign. The signs, the purpose is so that they will come to believe you and believe that you truly had an encounter with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so that's the purpose of the mateh turning to a nachash. Then he gives them the second sign of the tsaras, and he says, if they didn't believe in the first sign, the first miracle of the nachash, of the mateh, so they'll at least believe the second one of the tsaras. And then he adds on further, if they don't believe sign number 1, if they don't believe sign number 2, then do sign number 3, take of the waters of the Yarden and turn them the waters of the Nile, not the Yarden, and turn them into blood. So, Netivot Shalom says, why do you need 3? If they weren't convinced after sign number 1, what was going to be more convincing to them after sign number 2 or sign number 3? What's the difference between all 3 of them? Third question, Od tzarich bir, ha'inin shnei ha'osos harishonim shavu kevatchila, ve'ilu mimei ha'yaor shenepchu l'dam nisharu kach, velo shavu lios mayim kevatchila. If you think about it, there's a difference between the first 2 signs and the third. In the first 2 signs, a miracle occurs, a change occurs in the medium, in the staff or in the hand, and then the end of the miracle, both of them revert back to the way they were originally. The staff reverts back to being a staff, and the hand reverts back to being a healthy skinned hand. Whereas the third sign of the blood of the Nile, there is no return to the homeostasis. There is no return to normalcy or to the way it was before. The Nile remains filled with blood, the first makkah of the 10 makkos that are about to come. So why is there a difference between the first two and the third? Fourth question. It's actually the question of the Ramban on the Parsha. It says, Lo havinoti lama asa osas lamoshe. Why were these signs performed right now at the Sneh for Moshe Rabbeinu? Ki ma'amin haya Moshe shakadosh baruch hu medaber imo. Of course, Moshe believed that God was talking to him. His concern was the Jewish people wouldn't believe that God was talking to him. So God could have simply said, Ra'ui sheyomar hamateh asher biyadcha hashlech arza lifnehem v'haya lenachash v'chein ba'os hasheni. God should have told him, take your staff, go down to Egypt, throw it down on the ground, it'll turn to a snake, and then they'll believe in you. Send it down to the ground before them, when you get there to Egypt. Why does Hashem say, do it now? Send the staff down to the ground now, and it will turn to a nachash now. Now pick it up and it goes back to normal. And the same with the second one, with the tzarath. Why perform these miracles now, at the Sneh, seemingly to convince Moshe Rabbeinu, when the goal was really to convince Bnei Yisrael later on? Those are the 4 questions Netivot Shalom asks. To answer it, he says, Yesh lomar de'inyan zeh haya kehemshech lemara hasneh. Really, you have to understand these 3 signs in the context of our understanding of the whole story of the burning bush, which the Netivot Shalom elaborates upon in another essay, in another article. He says, Reishis hiskalos Hashem Moshe b'toch hasneh. The whole beginning of the revelation occurs here at the Sneh HaBo'er, when Moshe Rabbeinu sees a Sneh. He sees the Sneh as Einenu Ukal, and as a response to his vision of the Sneh that's Einenu Ukal, that's not consumed, Hashem says, Shal na'alecha ma'al raglecha, take off your shoes, ki makom asher atam alav adas kodeshu, the land you're standing on is holy land. V'bi'arnu ha'inyan, we've already explained this, says Netivot Shalom. Shemoshe hisponen b'matzavo shel klal Yisrael hanasun begalus Mitzrayim, u'mishuka b'memeshet shari tuma. Moshe came to the Sneh with a preconceived notion about the situation of the Jewish people in Egypt, that they were so stuck in the mired, in the depths of the tumah, of the impurity, the 49 levels of impurity in Mitzrayim. Vayar v'hinei Sneh bo'er ba'esh, hakol masbibim bo'er ka'esh. He sees the Sneh bo'er, and it's representative to him of this Jewish people situation in Egypt. Everything's burning up. Everything is fire. Everything is destruction. The Jewish people themselves are completely destroyed. And yet what Moshe Rabbeinu sees in the Sneh is a vision that convinces him that despite the destruction, there's still hope for redemption. He sees them burning, he sees them filled with all the powers of the impurities of Egypt that had strangled them. And nevertheless, im kozeh, hasneh enenu ukal, shadayin hem machzikim ma'amad. What he sees is that the burning bush is not consumed. What he learns from that experience is despite the fires that are consuming the Jewish people in the depths of the Tumah of Egypt, they are not consumed. They are not destroyed. They are not lost. Pirush. Mahu hakoach hamekayim she'enam nisrafim legamri ma'esh habo'er svivam. When he sees the Sneh, and he stands back, and he questions to himself, Madua lo yivar hasneh, he asks himself, wait a second, if I understand this as an analogy to the Jewish people, that they're burning, they're completely consumed by the Tumah of Egypt, and yet they're not consumed, they're not destroyed, I don't understand. What is the force that allows them to be sustained despite the fires burning around them? Why is there still a takuma to the Jewish people? Why is there still an essence that can be revived of the Jewish people? How can they still be redeemed? God's response was, take off your shoes. The land you're standing on is very holy. And he explained, Shakadosh Baruch Hu gilalo esod kocham shel Yisrael. Shem kodesh kodashim ki chelak Hashem amo, chelak elokami mal, umikan kocham ha'elyon habilti menutzach she'ein davar ba'olam she'echol liskab eleim. What Hashem's response was, take off your shoes because you're standing on holy ground, was, Moshe, you, like the Jewish people, are connected to holy ground. You're connected to God. You're a chelek Elokah mimao. You're a piece, an emanation of God himself. And therefore, with that eternal connection, you can never be destroyed. The image of the Sneh Bo'er was a lesson to Moshe Rabbeinu, that despite the fires of destruction, Jewish people's essence remains alive and einenu ukal, never consumed. And the reason for that is because of their connection to God. Their connection to God allows them to be sustained and to be nourished from the elokus, from the godliness, from the divinity in the world, no matter how much destruction is being brought around them. In essence, the lesson of the Sneh Bo'er to Moshe Rabbeinu is the lesson of the Pintel Yid. The lesson all over Chassidus and Kabbalah, that you could destroy and you could blemish and you could tar and you could burn all the externalities of the Jewish people, of the Jewish person, of the Jewish persona, of the purity and the white, essence of the externals of the Jewish people. But underneath it all, there's still a Yiddish neshama. Underneath it all, there's still a Jew who's tahor, who's kadosh, who's untouchable, because each and every Jew is a chelek Elokah mimao. Each and every Jew is intimately connected through their neshama to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that can never be extinguished. That can never be tarred or sullied or burned or destroyed. There's something holy in there. And because of that holiness inside, the Jewish people have the power to be redeemed. That's the whole lesson of the Sneh. Now Netivot Shalom says, with that understanding of this whole scene, we can understand for the need for the three signs and why they were given to Moshe Rabbeinu and the answer to all of our questions. He says Moshe's doubt, question number one was, why does Moshe doubt that they will believe that he has spoken to God and that he's coming to save them? Netivot Shalom says they won't believe it because they can't believe in themselves. They won't believe it because if they're stuck in the 49th level of Tumah, they're completely assimilated into Egyptian culture and religion, that how could God have the capacity to save them? How could anybody so far gone ever be saved? That's what leads Moshe Rabbeinu to believe that the Jewish people will doubt this whole scene. It's because they'll doubt themselves. They'll doubt their ability. And the three signs come to counteract the disbelief in the Jewish people. Sign number one comes, and what is it symbolic of? The Netivot Shalom says in Chassidus, there's a difference between the word mateh and makel. Mateh, he says, is me'olam habinyan. Mateh is a staff. It's something that holds things up. It comes from the world of constructiveness, the world of good, the world of holiness. A makel is usually symbolic not of the world of construction, but the world of destruction. It's something you hit things with. You hit a donkey with a makel, but you build a binyan with a mateh. So he says here, the image that God says to Moshe, take your mateh, something from olam habinyan, and throw it down to the ground, and it'll turn to a snake. But when you grab hold of it and you pick it up, it will become a mateh again, symbolic of the Jewish people themselves. You take something me'olam habinyan, something holy like the Jewish people, and you throw them down to the ground, you throw them into Egypt. They're going to be completely consumed by the nachash, the symbol in Kabbalah of the Sitra Achra, of the other side of the 49 levels of Tumah. They'll become that nachash. But when you grab hold of them and you ignite the connection they have to God, it'll come back to become a mateh again. It'll become something holy again, something me'olam habinyan again. That's exactly, Hashem says to Moshe, what's going to happen to the Jewish people. Yes, they'll doubt whether they're able to still be saved, but when they see this sign, they'll understand it. When they see this sign, they'll know that there is still hope for them as well. That's sign number one. Sign number two comes to teach them something a little bit more than that. The same lesson, but in a more powerful way. In case they don't believe sign number one, because they'll say, hey, that may be true in the olam hadomim, in the world of inanimate objects like a mateh, that somehow inanimate objects can still be redeemed even if they're thrown to the ground. Maybe it doesn't exist in the human realm. So God says, I'll give them another sign. A sign with the same lesson, but in the human realm. There's a build-up here. This time, take your hand, it's going to turn completely to tsaras. Tsaras is nechshav kemisa, according to Chazal. Someone with tsaras is considered dead. It's like the hand is dead, But the hand, when it's pulled out, comes alive again. You take a live hand, namely the Jewish people, something holy and pure, and you throw it down into Egypt, you put it in Chekecha, in the armpit of the world, it'll turn to tsaras, turn completely rotten, completely filled with disease and with tumah and impurities. But it can always come back to life. It can always return to be a healthy hand. And if you believe that in inanimate objects, believe it in human beings as well. So now we have the answer to question 1, 2, and 4 of Netivot Shalom. Question number 1, why didn't Moshe believe that they, the Jewish people, would believe him and his encounter with God? He didn't believe it because he knew that they were so far gone that they would think that there's no way to redeem them. Question number 2, why did you need 3 signs? Why isn't 1 enough? We know there's a progression. Sign number 1 was meant to teach them a little bit of a lesson. Once they gravitated to that, they understood that and internalized it, then you move to lesson number 2. You build upon it. There was a progression to the lessons. Each sign taught something similar, but with a new added twist, a new level to it. And question number 4 is, why did these signs happen to Moshe at Har Sinai? At the Sneh? Why didn't they happen only when they come to Egypt? Why didn't Hashem say, take the staff and throw it down Lifneihem? Why did he say to Moshe to do it now? And we answer that too, because Moshe himself didn't believe the Jewish people would believe. Moshe had to be convinced that someone who had fallen so low could be redeemed. Then the Jewish people had to be convinced that someone who fell so low could be redeemed, that God would indeed take interest in a case like this. And so, of course, it had to happen to Moshe. The remaining outstanding question is why the difference between the first 2 signs and the third? Why in the first 2 signs do they return to normal, whereas in the third sign, the waters of the Yarden remain bloody? The Netivot Shalom says because the lesson of the third sign was entirely different. Lesson of sign number 1 and sign number 2 was a lesson to Jewish people that they're still worthy, that Hashem believes in them, that they still have a holy neshama that God has the capacity to redeem. But sign number 3 was addressed not to the Jewish people's disbelief in their own worthiness of being redeemed, but in the ability of God to redeem them at all, because the powers of Egypt were so strong. And the third sign comes and says, you have to show the Jewish people that the waters of the Yarden, which are representative, of course, of the powers of Egypt, the powers of the Sitra Achra, the powers of the other side, of the powers of Tumah in the world, can be utterly destroyed and turned to blood, never to return again. That's why that sign doesn't turn back. In the first 2 signs, you have to convince Jewish people something sullied can return back to normal. That's speaking about the Jewish people. The third sign is not about the Jewish people, it's about the Egyptians. That their power of destructiveness represented by Egypt's mainstay, which is the Nile, can be destroyed by God, never to come back. So the whole process here of the signs was a progression of one lesson to the next for the Jewish people. Main lessons to them was to convince them that no matter how far gone they are still holy and worthy of redemption, and to convince them that, of course, Hashem has the power to destroy the Sitra Achra. Even though it had such a powerful effect upon them in Egypt, God still has the power to utterly neutralize it and bring the Jewish people completely back to the world of Kedusha. Ultimately, it's the 2 things we have to believe as well. We always have to believe in number 1, the strength of ourselves, the holiness within ourselves, that we are always capable of more connection to God and of redemption. And number 2, the capacity and the power of God and the Torah to really come to bear on every area of life, not necessarily in a destructive way, but to completely overwhelm every other area of life as the centerpiece of life with incredible strength to be able to drive us, to inspire us, and to lead us in the right direction. Shabbat Shalom.